Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's a Thursday evening and the sun has been shining. And well, yesterday the sun was shining. But before we go any further, this is Valerie M, standing in my truth, positive affirmations as per normal. And I'm really excited because I had these guys on a couple of weeks ago and it was so rushed and it was on a Saturday morning. And I thought, do you know what? These guys deserve longer to actually tell the story. So before I bring them on, I just want to say to you guys, hope that you've been enjoying the sunshine. And this, I'm making sure that I am wearing my Paul Cannonville Foundation t-shirt. I had to. Hello to everybody in the chat room, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Mixcloud. How are you all doing? So yeah, I'm making sure that I'm representing tonight, which is the Paul Cannonville Foundation t-shirt. You know you can get this. I'll give you the details near the end. It's quite apt for the show tonight. Normally I don't do a sports edition show, but it isn't. It's about the authors who have written the most awesome book called Football's Black Pioneers, and they're also researching Windrush. So I felt that these guys deserve to have another tag and touch with the audience. Now, you're probably wondering why, Football's Black Pioneer. Well, for those who are sports minded and who are into football, and even if you're not actually into football, there has been some prolific pioneers in the game, mixed race and black, that have been there for years. And it's quite poignant at this stage that this book has been written and been released around this time, for the mere fact that we're all, the sports is in a bit of turmoil, whether it be NBA, whether it be F1, whether it be swimming, it doesn't really matter. There's a massive racial connotation. And it doesn't help that yesterday we also had this, the report that Boris Johnson saying that this is, there's no racism. But this is not about racism. So I hope that you will kick back and listen to these wonderful gentlemen who have taken their time to research the black pioneers of football. Men who have ordinary jobs, who weren't like the footballers that we have today. Men that fought in the war for Great Britain. They've been coming over on the Windrush boat, working in the mines and playing football. Extraordinary story, mind-blowing and really heartwarming. Now, Bill HERN and David GLEAVE are the authors of this book. And without further ado, without dragging this out, I'm going to bring on the first of the authors for tonight. Bill HERN would give you his story, and I know that he's right here waiting to come in. Bill, let me introduce you. Good evening, Bill. Are you there?
Hi, Valerie. Good to see you.
Yeah. Hey! I was like, oh my God, we had a sound check and now I can't hear him.
Hope you can
How
hear me
are
now.
you?
I'm great.
Oh, you are absolutely superb. Superb. How are you, my lovely?
Very, very well.
Good stuff.
Week, hasn't it? Nice and sunny.
Well, if we can't travel, at least we have some sunshine to cheer us all up, don't you think?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to talking about these heroes, these pioneers with you and the audience.
So am I. Before I bring in your co-partner in crime, I should say, Bill, just say hello to the audience and just give us a brief synopsis about yourself.
Oh, well, hello, everyone. I worked as a civil servant for over 40 years. And when I retired, I discovered I had a passion for Black history. I don't know where it came from, but it's something I've become quite obsessed about. And it started off with looking at Black military history, West Indians who fought in World War I. And I can't say it was a chore, but I went to Barbados and visited every Commonwealth War grave in Barbados, which got me
Oh,
out to all
wow.
those places where you wouldn't expect tourists to be. But it was great. It was the real Barbados. Um, when David did a bit of work on that as well, and when we finished that, we thought, what did we do next? And we both love football. We thought, well, who was the first black footballer at each of the clubs? And we found that very few clubs knew who their first black player was. So that was the first task, identify them. And then we started looking at their stories. And that was just amazing. I mean, their experiences, the differences, because we went right back to 1896, right up to the present day. So you can imagine the stories in terms of social history, black history, football history is completely different, and geography as well. That the players came from, I mean, most of them were born in England, but originated from all around the world. And it's just amazing the impact that black players have had on the English game. Changed it completely for the better.
Yeah, yeah. So that is your synopsis that brings you up here. So before we actually talk about that, because I know I've got David waiting in the wings, just you said that you were a civil servant, and your passion was to go and do all this research. Give me a bit of a history about your background. Forget about the football background. You as a whole. I want people to get to know the author himself. So apart from being a civil servant, you come from Sunderland, your
Yep.
family, your upbringing. Give me a bit about that.
Okay, I was born and bred in Sunderland, so I'm a Sunderland fan. Um, Moved to London for work around about 1988. Got two sons. My son's got two sons, and I'm one of two sons. So
Oh, blimey.
there aren't any girls or females in our family apart from mothers and wives.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Moved from London back to Leeds. I live in Leeds now, a little village between Leeds and York. I never lived in a village before, but absolutely love it. It's fantastic. Go up to Sunderland every other week to watch when we could, to watch the football. Spend an awful lot of time in London, which I love. I mean, absolutely adore London, and I've missed it so much in the last year. So much research can be done in London. So, I like to travel. I get to Barbados every year. Went to Trinidad to do some research on Mona Baptiste, who was on the Windrush. That was a fantastic 2 weeks. Trinidad gets a lot of bad press, but my goodness, the friendliest people I've ever come across. It was great.
Well, stick a
So
pin
yeah,
in that part, because I'm going to ask you about that. The whole the Mona story, and going to the Trinidad and the Windrush. So you hang on tight in there. Now your co-partner in crime is David GLEAVE, and he's in the wings, and I'm going to bring him in. Good evening, David. How are you?
Good evening. I'm absolutely fine. Great to see you.
Oh, you too. As I said right at the top of the show, we had you guys on earlier, and for me, it's an awesome, awesome pleasure to have you back. It was rushed, and it was a Saturday morning, and it was all fresh. But now I can get the essence of you both. Now I've just heard about Bill Hearn, where he's grown up, and the passion, how he started. Introduce yourself, please, David, and let us know a bit about you and why.
Okay, well, I mean, like Bill, I was a civil servant and we worked in the same department. Our paths crossed from time to time. I don't think we worked together closely on a regular basis, but we both retired at the same time. And I think we started working on projects together once we'd retired. My personal story is obviously quite different from Bill's. I mean, I'm a Londoner. I've spent my whole life in South London.
He's
I've
a
al-
Londoner.
Um, I'm married to Roxanne, and we've got three children together, three mixed heritage children together. And really, it's through her that my interest in Black history developed, because I went to school. I always enjoyed history as a subject at school, but I mean, it was white history. It was taught by white teachers, and there was no real Black dimension to it at all. And really, it was only once I met Roxanne and started to think more about the Black British history that I realised, how much more diverse British history is than I was ever taught at school, and much more interesting, I think, than the version I was taught at school. She's spent many years as a teacher, And she was always coming home to me and saying, oh, I'm going to be doing a lesson about such and such. Can you find out some resources that I could use in the lesson? So she had me delving into Black history. And as we've been married for 40 years, my interest in Black history stems really from meeting her 40 odd years ago. As I say, we've got 3 children together, and we wanted them to have a good understanding of both sides of their sort of cultural heritage. We knew that they would tend to get the white stuff from school, the history, that would be from school. But if we wanted them to get any Black history, I think we both accepted that we would have to do that for ourselves. And so in supporting her as a teacher, we've also been trying to make sure that our own children have got sort of an understanding of the Black heritage too. So as I say, I think that's a different story from Bill's, but we both share the same interests. We both love football. We're both interested in Black history. And so when Bill proposed to me that we should start working on this topic, first Black footballers at each of the clubs, I just thought it was a great idea, because it was a brilliant way for us to combine two subjects that interest us.
I know that Bill sort of highlighted right at the top again how you both met, but when did you first actually got together?
Well, it would have been in work, and so I don't think we really worked. We worked closely together a few times, but I mean, we both had long careers in the civil service. So for most of that time, we probably wouldn't have been aware of each other at all. I think it was towards the end, over the last few years of our careers, that we worked much more closely together in the same bit of the civil service. And it was really when we retired. We both retired at the same time, and I think we were both looking around for things to do. At that time, my wife was involved in a project that Bill mentioned to do with Black soldiers in the British Army in World War I. That was really her project, but she wanted people to help her with the research, and so Bill and I, got drawn, I think, very happily into helping her with the research of that project. And it was when that project ended that Bill sort of, I think, came up with the idea for Black football as our next thing to move on to. Okay,
Bill, I'm going to come back to you. Thank you, David, for that. So for both of you now, again, thank you so much. I'm going to ask this question. So now here you both are saying, okay, we want to, investigate, who was the first Black footballer. How did you go about this? Bill, let me put this to you. How did you go about actually finding out the first official Black footballer?
Well, the first official one was already well known. That was Arthur Wharton. So that was an easy one. Somebody else had already done the research on that one. It was much more difficult in other clubs. That's Arthur there in the top left in the football strip. He was the first Black player to play in the Football League. He played for a club called Rotherham Town. And he played in the first division as well. He was Sheffield United's first Black player way back in the 1890s. I know David did more research on Arthur than I did, so I don't know if David wants to jump in.
Yeah, David, do you want to take that up for me?
Well, one of the things that I found interesting about this is the variety of stories that we came across and the different backgrounds that these players had. Arthur Wharton came from really a relatively middle-class background in what is now part of Ghana. So he was of African heritage. His parents, his father certainly was a Methodist minister, to train to be a Methodist minister.
Okay.
When he got lost, David.
No, we got it.
Just a second.
Yes. There you go.
Arthur basically was sent to England to be trained as a Methodist minister, but when he got here, unfortunately, from his parents' point of view, he turned out to be very good at sport, and so he made a career out of sport rather than being a Methodist minister. I imagine his parents were quite disappointed about that, but he was very good at sport, and not just football. I mean, Arthur Wharton was a genuine all-rounder. He was perhaps his biggest claim to fame, apart from football, was the fact that he was a very fast runner. I think he was either joint winner, holder of the world record, speed record for 100 yards, or on his own. He was very, very quick. And of course, you could run professionally in those days. So they used to run for prize money. And runners would give 10 yards start kind of thing to somebody, and they'd still win. So you could make money as a runner. And you could make money as a footballer, and I think Arthur was also involved in cycling. Basically, if it was a sport, he was involved in it, and he was able to make money out of it. But a very sort of essentially middle class background for him. And some of the other players that we can talk about in a minute were definitely not from a middle class background. I mean, the other guy on the slide that you showed a moment ago, or the picture you showed a moment ago, was definitely not middle class. And I think Bill's probably best placed to talk about Willie Clark. But as I say, that's one of the things we found fascinating. There are such varied stories.
Bill, do you want to take that up for me? So we got Willie Clark also around the same era that played, just after Arthur Wharton. Give me the synopsis about him.
Yeah, well, earlier when you mentioned these footballers had normal lives, they weren't superstars like today's footballers. Clark just sat up. I mean, it's quite cool to see him referred to Willie Clark, because he was routinely referred to as Darky Clark. Now, that was meant to be a term of endearment, but no one ever asked Willie Clark whether he liked to be called Darky. But he had no choice. He was the only black player around. What could he do? He was on his own. He had nobody sticking up for him. So Willie's life, his father came from Guyana, British Guyana. He was educated in Scotland, was his father. Willie was one of 12 children, and he was very, very good at football. And he moved down south to Bristol Rovers. He had a season there. They were in the Southern League then, but it was a very good league. It's a lot better than it is now. And he met a lady called Ada Higginbottom, and he married Ada. But this is where sort of life's nobles come in. She was pregnant when they married, so almost certainly in the early 1900s, it was a had to get married, because people did that. People didn't have children out of wedlock. So he was almost probably forced into that marriage. Ada's father was very unhappy about it. He wasn't happy about his daughter marrying a footballer, because they weren't well paid and they weren't glamorous. He obviously wasn't happy that Ada was pregnant, and he certainly wasn't happy that that Willie was black, because mixed marriages were very much frowned upon. They had 2 daughters, and Aston Villa came along and wanted to buy Willie, and they did. And in those days, Aston Villa were the best team in the world. So we're talking about Willie Clark would be an excellent footballer.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they'd won the league 5 times. Nobody was anywhere near them. And Willie was the first black player to goal in the entire English Football League. Now, hardly anybody's heard of Willie Clark, but that should deserve a statue. He was the 3rd black player to play in the Football League, after Arthur Wharton, and a player called John Walker. John Walker played for Lincoln. And again, when we go back to, these were not... John Walker was born in Leith when he was rife. The port was on the edge of being closed down because of a cholera outbreak. So he had a really rough upbringing. He moved to Lincoln, and in a year he was dead. He died of tuberculosis. These are problems, not our footballers. Willie played for this great Aston Villa team. He almost won the league. He was the first black player to win a league championship medal. He moved to Bradford, player to win a medal, because Bradford won the 2nd division titles. But while he was there, Ada died. She was only 24.
Oh, wow. I had a feeling he was gonna drop out, David, because his internet was going a bit shaky there. Do you know what I'm saying? But he's going to join us back again. So for anyone that's just joining us and going like, what's going on here? I'll just put the book up. So for anyone that's just joining us, I can see people joining us from different platforms. We have the authors in the house, the Football's Black Pioneers, and they also they are well, they're hoping to get published. They're looking into the passengers of the Windrush. And I've still got David GLEAVE, and so David and I are going to continue talking until his co-writer joins us back. So, David, here we are. You've both decided now to write this book, and you're now getting, walking around and said, okay, we're going to look for this place. How did you come about to do your own investigation and research? Because Bill's already said that he went to Trinidad, he's gone to Barbados. What did you do?
Well, I didn't go to either of those places. Probably I'm not as well travelled as Bill. And Bill was very good at interviewing, actually tracking down players and interviewing them. And I was more doing the book research, really, which was sad from my point of view, but never mind.
No, someone's got to do it.
I mean, in terms of tracking these players down, Bill's already mentioned that the first black player, Arthur Wharton, was already quite well known, and some of the others were quite well known. So really, it was a question of tracking down on the internet who the first black player at a certain club was, and then checking very carefully the facts and figures of their stories, because there is ever such a lot of rubbish on the internet. So you do have to pick quite carefully through what you find on the internet.
Yeah.
But then there are other stories where we would approach the club for help, and very often the club were not much good at all. And then we would approach fans groups, and fans groups were better. I mean, several fans groups I contacted, and they were all very helpful. So I'll give you an example. I went to the Rochdale fans group, fairly convinced that I knew who their first black player was going to be.
Oh, right, okay.
Because I was following his career around the clubs, and he'd already been the first black player at 5 clubs. So I thought, well, he's bound to have been the first black player at Rochdale. And I went to the fans forum. I said, it was Tony Collins, wasn't it? And a few of them said, yeah, Tony Collins. But then a couple of the really old hands said, no, actually, we had a guy called Calvin Simons who played for us a couple of years before Tony Collins. And so that was a stroke of luck, really, that we stumbled across Calvin. And in a way, I don't think Bill and I either said this in the introduction. One of the reasons we wanted to do this was because we were really concerned that some of these players would simply be lost from history. If this research wasn't done now or very soon, then the names would just disappear. I mean, Rochdale's a good example. If I hadn't gone to the Rochdale Forum last year, if he'd been left 4 or 5 years, those couple of fans who remembered him, might well have passed away. So, it's important that this research is done now, because Calvin Simons didn't perhaps have a sparkling football career at Rochdale, but nonetheless, he was their first black player, and that does deserve to be remembered. I mean, and Calvin is still alive. He's 89. He had his 89th birthday.
Yes. Give me a bit more story about him. What was his full story?
Well, Calvin was born in Bermuda in 1930, 32, whatever age it makes him, 89 now. Yeah. He basically came over to England to try. He was good at football and cricket on Bermuda. He came to England to try his luck as a young man of sort of late teens, I think very early 20s. He was originally going to play, I think, for Bolton, but they dropped out at the last minute. So Rochdale stepped in and said, well, you can come to us instead. And to be honest, imagine it. I mean, you're in Bermuda. He said to me that his regular routine training involved getting up and going for an early morning swim in the sea. You wouldn't want to try that anywhere near Rochdale. So not that they've got a sea, but so it must have been an absolute culture shock for him. I think he only played one first team game for Rochdale. He had a couple of quite bad knee injuries, and although they operated on it a couple of times, they couldn't really fix it. And so after 2 years, he agreed with the club that he was going to go back to Bermuda. I think, as it happened, his mother was also dying, so he wanted to go back to Bermuda anyway to be with his mother. So he went back to Bermuda, still carrying, still as Rochdale's first black player. He carried on playing football in Bermuda because it's less physically challenging over there, but really made his name as a cricketer in Bermuda, and he's very, very well known as a cricketer in Bermuda. One of the best cricketers that Bermuda ever produced, probably. And we're in the process of writing an article for the cricket magazine Wisdom about Calvin's time as a cricketer on Bermuda, because obviously not many people here know much about Bermuda at all, or especially not about their cricket. So Wisdom were interested in doing an article about him, and that's what we're doing. I'm hoping to speak to him over the weekend just to run the article by him and see what he thinks of it.
Please give him respect. I'm putting respect on his name, let him know that we did speak about him on this program, because I'm learning every day. I'm just learning, and there's anyone that watches this now and the replay will learn more about Mr. Simons himself. Bill's come back, which is brilliant. Okay, you okay there, Bill?
Yes, I'm fine. I mean, Calvin is delighted with this publicity. I mean, it really has rejuvenated him. He'd probably live another 20 years as a result of all this fame. So we've made him very happy, which is nice.
But I think that's a good thing. And the reason why I'm saying that is, as earlier you and I were speaking, and I genuinely believe that the generation now, we're not if we wanted to go and find out about the Tudors or the Stuarts, the English history, or even the English footballers, or anyone for that matter of fact, there is a history for them there, but there isn't that history for the Black pioneers. You've only the most that I ever heard was probably Batson, and then you got Cyril Regis. And I guess that, that's because of my dad or my era. But anything about below that, not even my father's aware of it. I asked my father, and he couldn't recite any. And my dad's 74, and he couldn't tell me anybody. Do you know what I'm saying? But he's an avid football supporter, because that's how I got into football, and also cricket. But he couldn't. So for me, I'm just saying to you guys that the youths of today who, from the academies, this is not in the academy. So I can guess that anyone who's still alive that played football, like, Calvin Simons, it's a pleasure, because then he can still tell us of what was going on. But anyway, that's just me harping on. I'll take that bit. Now, before I go any further, there's a glitch somewhere with someone's phone or something in the background is playing. I'm not sure.
My phone's off.
Okay. So I'm just checking. So I know that mine's off as well. So I'm just checking. So as you can, I don't know if when I'm speaking to you guys, can you hear like a slight feedback?
I could.
I can now, yeah. I didn't notice it before, but yeah.
Yes. But it should be fine out there. I'll get someone to, if there's anyone out there. Good evening to Clinton and good evening to Anne. We're here talking about the history of football as a whole, and not just about football. We're talking about the history of people that played that we don't get to hear about. So let's take it on, and let's hopefully that little glitch will stop. I don't know whose it is. It could be when you rejoined us, Bill. There's a bit of a kickback. So maybe just turn your phone down, not your phone, your laptop down or something, just so that it stops the kickback. That's all.
Yep.
Awesome. That sounds just a little bit better. There we go. Okay. Without further ado. So here we are. And on your website, you've given a timeline to various players that played within the league. And when I say league, we're talking about the Berries and the Rochdales and the Doncaster. Let me give a little history here. Well, I want you to just tap into some of the people that we spoke about earlier. Now, unfortunately, Tony Collins died just recently. He was another, stalwart, like, Mr. Simons. I'm putting Mr. Simons, who is a shame that we didn't get to hear his story, but you guys did, or his family did. Who wants to take up this story for me? Tony Collins.
Well, I can start off with Tony. I mean, you mentioned youth academies not so long ago and young players not knowing about these old black players. Interesting, there's a little clip, I think it's on YouTube somewhere, of the Watford Youth Academy going to meet Tony Collins.
Really?
He's been in a care home for some years now, but a small group of the Watford Youth squad went up and met him, and they had a chat to him. And for instance, I think that one of the young lads said to him, "Oh, I'm a left winger like you are a left winger, Tony. What advice would you give me?" And he said, "Keep away from the fullbacks," was his advice. So Tony had, I think, a good sense of humour, and that was only a year or so ago that he was being talked to by the youth players of Watford. And I should give a good shout out for Watford, really, because the Watford club and the Watford Museum are very, very good. They are one of the ones who do take a keen interest in their former black players. Tony, I think, is interesting because there is this feeling that, we haven't had black players in England, you haven't had black people in England before the Windrush, which is absolute nonsense, really. And Tony Collins is, living proof of that. Tony Collins was proof of that. He was born in London in I think it was 1924 or 3, something like that. And his, there's no father named on his birth certificate. His mother was very young. His father, I think, probably was from West Africa, and he went on to become the first black player at, I think it was 5 clubs. There are 3 of them in the book, and there were 2 clubs who he was the first black player for who aren't in the league anymore, so they don't appear in the book. The ones in the book, I'll try and remember, are Watford, Crystal Palace, and
Norwich.
Thank you, Norwich. I knew he'd do that. Thank you. Yeah. And the 2 that weren't in the book were Torquay, because they're
that's it.
And I think York were the other one. So that's 5 clubs where he was the first black player, and that's really is quite an achievement. And the other thing, of course, is he did serve his country during the Second World War. I mean, I don't think he was necessarily a particularly enthusiastic recruit, but nonetheless, he was called up and he did serve, and he spent most of his time in Italy. I think by his own account, as a driver, really driving officers from place to place, but playing quite a lot of football. And it was there that he was spotted. People remembered him, seeing him playing football in Italy during the war, and he was recommended for a trial at Sheffield Wednesday, and that's where he got his first professional contract in Sheffield, and that's also where he met his wife, incidentally. But he never actually played in Sheffield's first team. He had to move to York and subsequently to Watford, and it was at Watford where he really made his breakthrough into first team football.
Oh, wow.
But Tony Collins is one of those people whose name really should be much better known than it is, because he was an absolute true pioneer, and one of them few players who were black players who were playing during the 50s.
Awesome. Did he not go on to be the first football black manager as well? Is that correct?
That is correct. Well done. Yes, good research. That was at Rochdale. He went to Rochdale as his last club playing for. As I said, Calvin Simons was the first black player there, but Tony was their second black player. And after he'd been there a year, the manager at Rochdale moved to a new and better job, and he said to the board at Rochdale, "You ought to give Tony the job because he'd be very good at it." And the players also said, "Look, we want Tony to be the manager." So by popular acclaim, Tony became the first black manager of Rochdale. And it's worth mentioning, I think, that the chairman of Rochdale knew that he was making really what could be quite a controversial appointment, because there are quotes from the manager, the owner, the chairman, saying, "Look, I know this might not suit everybody, but we think he's the best man for the job, and we don't think he's count against him." I think it's very much the credit of the Rochdale chairman that they gave Tony a crack at the job, and he was very successful there. I think he was there, I believe it was for 7 seasons. And Rochdale have never been a very glamorous side, but they probably had their most successful time during when Tony was manager there, and he led them to the League Cup final, which for a team from the bottom division, as they were, was completely unprecedented, and only one other club has ever achieved that. Subsequently, many years later, I think it was Bradford, reached the League Cup final as well. So he was successful, and it was a shame that he decided he'd taken Rochdale as far as he could, and he packed up at Rochdale. He was expecting to get another manager's job, but it never came, and you have to wonder why he never got another manager's job.
Right.
He did go on to a very successful career as a sort of assistant manager at a couple of clubs, and also he's very successful as a chief scout. Older heads in the audience will know the names of Don Revie.
Oh yes.
Tony was headhunted by Don Revie to go and work for him at Leeds, and he was very successful at Leeds as chief scout. He also worked at Manchester United as chief scout initially, I think, for Ron Atkinson, subsequently for,
Wow.
yeah, so he's been around, and also Alex Ferguson. He was chief scout with Alex Ferguson for a year or two. So he was a player, a pioneering manager, and he was also a very successful scout at some of the top clubs in the country. So, why his name is not better known, I don't really know.
Yeah, I'm flabbergasted. I'm being serious. I really am. So here we have Tony. Bill, take me onto. So I've just spoken about Tony. Take me onto here. Walter Tall.
Yeah, Walter had a Barbadian father and a white mother from Kent, and his mum died when he was, I think, 7, and then his dad died. Although he'd remarried, his dad died when he was 9, so he was taken into an orphanage with his brother Edward. So it was quite a difficult upbringing, but he did get a good education in the orphanage. They were very strict and very keen to educate the young children they looked after. Before they left the orphanage, his brother Edward was adopted by a family in Glasgow, which was great news for Edward. He was going to get very, very well looked after, but it did leave Walter alone in the orphanage. Edward was another success. He went on to be the first black dentist in Britain.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, it was a great.
Way.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. What people can achieve from the most difficult of beginnings. He was a great golfer. He was a great singer. So a huge success in Scotland. Walter, he was a great footballer, and he was spotted by an amateur cup called Clapton. And Clapton won the amateur cup that year, the year that Walter played for them. And that's the biggest competition an amateur team can win. And obviously, clubs were watching him, thinking he's a very, very good young player. And Spurs signed him. And he played Spurs. And he played a few games for Spurs as an amateur. He actually won a cup with Spurs. So in his very first season, he won 4 trophies.
Oh my God! Is that the only time that Spurs won a trophy? I'm only joking. Sorry.
I think he signed professional on May the 13th, 1909. I think it was. And the same day, I think he passed his apprenticeship as a printer because he needed a profession as well. And the day after he signed, Spurs were off to a tour of South America. So they did gather at White Hart Lane, and they jumped on a coach, and the coach broke down before he got to Waterloo. So they had to get the next boat train to Southampton. And by the time they got there, the ship was pulling out into the distance. And the Everton team, who were also going to South America, were looking over the railings, laughing at the Spurs players, standing there with their cases and not knowing what to do.
Thanks, Bill, for that story.
It's like the Keystone on top, isn't it? And they saw a tug. So they all jumped on a tug, and that went as fast as it could to catch the ship up. And they all had to climb up a rope ladder to get onto the ship. So it wasn't the best to start. It was a 3-week journey. And we know that Walter had a bad head throughout the 3 weeks. Apparently the sun got to him. They had a great tour, a great time in South America. It's been a great chance for him to get to meet his new colleagues and so on. And then came back to England, made his debut 1st of September 1909 at Sunderland. And that was the last time Sunderland won. We beat you. I think it was 3-1.
Oh my God! He's rubbing it in.
I had to get that in.
My God!
So he was doing really, really well. And then he played a game at Bristol City, and he suffered the most horrendous racist abuse that anybody had ever imagined. And the press even reported it. It was very rare for the press to jump to the defense of a black person because it was normal to use bad terms towards black people. But the press even said, this is too much. And the Spurs directors were a bit embarrassed by this. They didn't know how to cope with this. Every time we play this man, he's going to get booed and abused. So they never actually played him in another away game. They played him in 2 home games where he was probably more cosseted. And basically they kept him out of the team, and he went off and joined Northampton a couple of years later, became a great hero in Northampton, played well over 100 games,
Even now, there's a statue of him in Northampton. There's a road. There's a pub. So he's well remembered in Northampton. Of course, war broke out in 1914, and Walter was one of the first to enlist. He enlisted as a private because he had little choice, because black people couldn't be officers in those days. It was completely forbidden. Yet he did so well. He impressed his commanding officer, who recommended him for a commission and said, "Yeah, you can be an officer," in spite of the regulations saying that that wasn't allowed. So Walter became one of the very, very first black British officers in the British Army. So, absolute hero. And he needed to be better than everybody else to get to be an officer when he was black. Tragically, he was killed in battle. He led his men into battle and lost his life. But he was so popular and so respected. People risked their lives to try and go and retrieve his body. They failed. They never actually got his body back. But hero.
So he's buried.
He like many people, they just sunk into the mud. Some bodies were recovered but weren't identifiable. So we don't really know where his body ended up. I mean, it's a bit ironic because there was a comment meant to be a compliment in the newspaper. It said that in spite of his skin colour, he had red blood and he had a white man's heart. Now, that's probably the most racist statement I've ever heard in my life.
God.
That was meant as a compliment. Walter, you're good enough to be thought of as a white person. But what did he do? He spilt that red blood and his heart stopped, fighting for king and country. So, absolute hero. He is commemorated. He was on a first-class stamp a few years back. He was on a £5 coin, had his head on. There's even a post box in Glasgow in his honour, because he almost signed for Glasgow Rangers. In fact, he would have played for Glasgow Rangers had he not died. After the war, he was going to go to Scotland to live with his brother. So Walter Tull, probably the most famous old black footballer. And
the story that you have of these wonderful, men. And when I say wonderful men, please do not get me wrong when I'm saying, the black, white, everyone's wonderful. But in terms of, for me, it's a football. It's just wonderful. How did you research this story? Bill, David, please tell me, because if he's died in battle, where is this written?
Well, I mean, I'll take it. Walter's story is one of the relatively well-known ones in the book. I mean, I think teachers quite often use Walter in schools as an example of, a black person serving in the British Army. So his story is relatively well-known. One of the things that interests me about the Tull story really is his heritage. I mean, I've mentioned at the beginning that Arthur Wharton came from really a pretty middle-class background in Ghana. You have to remember that Walter's grandfather was an enslaved man on Barbados. You can't get much more different in terms of background than that. And that's one of the things this book brings out, the huge disparity, differences, the different stories you get that you uncover when you're looking into these stories. A lot of the war records were destroyed. A lot of the records don't exist. They were damaged by German bombing during World War II. We're very lucky that Walter's army records survived more or less intact, and there's a lot of material in the National Archives at Kew that detail Walter's army career. So some of this is difficult to find, some of it's slightly easier to find. Walter's was one of the easier ones to research, to be honest.
Because, the others that I'm going to bring up, I guess it wasn't that easy. You were saying earlier that you had to go to some of the clubs and they didn't have the information. And I guess you had to trace down their families. Now, some of them probably didn't have children, and so their legacy stopped right there and then. I'm going to bring up this chap here. Tell me about, I'm going to bring Brendan back. Let me go back. Tell me about Erwin Costady, because you're saying he was the first black player to play for West Germany. He was a top scorer in the Belgian league. Now, I guess I'm coming all the way. Now, this is in the 70s, so I'm coming a bit forward because I'm going to go back. But, this is already written. So how do we not know this? Someone take me up on this story.
Well, the reason that Irwin's famous is in relation to English football, really, because he came to prominence when he was about to play against England for Germany when he won his second cap. And the English press thought this was remarkable that a black player was actually playing international football. And they said, of course, it couldn't happen in England because the black footballers have certain obstacles that they can't really overcome. And
Which was?
Well, black players didn't have the right temperament.
Oh, wow.
Black players couldn't cope with English conditions, I guess, meaning muddy pitches. Physical contact, black players couldn't cope with physical contact. Somebody should tell George Berry and people like that. You know,
wow.
Very tough black players. And the other one was they wouldn't put up with barracking, which is basically saying we won't stop the barracking. They would have to live with the barracking. So, you know, this was a ridiculous, I mean, looking at it now, this is a ridiculous point of view to take.
Absolutely.
And, you know, at the same time, players like Laurie Cunningham were being released by Arsenal because he had emotional weaknesses, basically. A player called Eddie Corker, who went on to be a very, very good player for West Ham, was released by Queen's Park Rangers for the same reason. And I've never seen a young white kid released by a club who've then said, oh, we're releasing him because he's got basically deficiencies, you know, that so I think there's a bit of stereotyping because Laurie Cunningham went on to be one of the best players ever, and Eddie Corker was a very, very good professional, made a good career in the game. Absolutely. So there was this perception about black players, really. And in spite of the fact that in 1975, a guy called Bernard Joy, a very respected journalist, said that there'll never be a black international. There's no sign of there being a black international. 3 years later, Viv Anderson became the first full England international. And last year, Rhys James became the 100th black full international for England.
This is it, because I was just at say to you, so if this guy was playing in Germany, so he's not British, he's a first black player to play in West Germany, you know, and by this time we're talking about the Cold War is over, you know, I think the Berlin Wall hadn't come down. I think the Berlin Wall had come down by then, so they hadn't come down because that's West Germany versus East Germany, if my history serves me well. And here's this guy, and he's won, you know, the first 3 caps for West Germany in 1974. But are you saying that our first black player was after 1970?
I'm saying that the first full international for England was 1978. Viv Anderson for England against Czechoslovakia. And that made big news. I mean, I've spoken to Viv about it. And Viv got a telegram from the Queen. He got a telegram from Elton John. I mean, it was big, big news. A black player actually playing for England's full international team. There were black players who played for different levels previously to that. I mean, Laurie Cunningham played for the under-21s a little bit before Viv played for England. And a player called John Charles, who's long forgotten.
I know that name.
Well, he came from a famous family. The Charles family had a lot of footballers, and John Charles played for England youth in 1962. But most people forget that. Viv is the trailblazer. Really, he was the one that broke the barrier.
The barrier. Okay, I'm going to go back into the 1800s or the 1900s, and I've noticed that you've put, you know, following your Twitter page and all your other pages and your websites, there's people that I didn't see before has now come to prominence, which I think I discussed with you guys earlier. I'm going to throw it here. Now, Steve McConey, and you know, you put this message up on the 19th of March, but he died, you know, it says he died on this day in 2015. Who was he? Because right here it says he remains an enigma. Some say he was a great player. He was at Coventry, Cardiff and Barnsley, but he was all quickly rejected, you know, who all seems like quickly rejected him. Can someone take this story? Because I don't know who this guy is.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick it off. I'm sure David will jump in as well. Steve McConey was South African, and he came to England in the 1950s. and went to Coventry, who were then, I think, in the Division 3, so, third tier of football. And he wasn't a success. He didn't last very long at all. He went off to, well, he played for Holland. He played quite well in Holland for a short while, but he tried his luck again in England with Cardiff. That didn't work out. He tried with Barnsley. He played one game for Barnsley, and we got the director's minutes from the Barnsley club. And after that one game, the directors told the manager, get rid of him, find out what it takes. So,
but why? What was the problem?
The reason why isn't documented. I'm fairly certain it isn't just down to his ability, but he was a Walter Mitty character. There are so many things he's claimed to have done that are demonstrably untrue, and yet in Africa he's remembered as a great player. He's compared to Pelé, but we can't find any evidence of him being a competent player. And he certainly didn't do a lot of the things that he claimed to do. One thing we do know about him is he went to prison for 12 years for an acid attack on his wife and his wife's solicitor in America. I've read the court papers, and he appears very, very guilty to me. He lost an appeal, yet there are some investigative journalists who claim that he was framed. So who knows? But everything around Steve McCorney leaves a big question mark. But a massive, massive character. Whether he was a good footballer or not, who knows?
We never got to find out.
Well,
we just didn't.
Well,
Okay.
he didn't. He said he played for lots of teams, and when you go to those clubs like Real Madrid, Torino in Italy, there's Barcelona. I think it was Paris Saint-Germain. No record of him. He didn't play for them. He reckoned he was sold when he went to Australia for a while, and he reckoned he'd been sold for £80,000 or something. Actually, Barnsley had given him a free transfer.
Oh.
Kettering on the verge of signing him in non-league football, and he decided, no, I'm joining Real Madrid instead. Didn't happen.
Oh my God! Oh wow! That's probably why I don't know about Steve McConey.
I take it all back if he was a great footballer, but I can't find any evidence of it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go back here. Give me this synopsis about this guy, Steve Johnson. One of you mentioned him just a bit earlier, and it says one of the nicest people we interviewed for the football's black pioneer, played the last of his 476 league and cup games 31 years ago today. He was the first black player for the Shakers and Wigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Did that me up?
Well, I'll start off if you like, but I mean, Bill interviewed Steve Johnson, so he'll probably have to fill in the gaps. But I mean, I think the thing to say about Steve Johnson is, I mean, he was born in Liverpool, but I mean, I think he's absolutely revered at Bury still. He was a real hero at Bury. Unfortunately, Bury dropped out of the league as we were writing the book, and so there isn't a Bury chapter in the book, but there is a Wigan chapter, and Steve Johnson appears there as Wigan's first black player. But as I say, he's one of those players, I think, who gives the lie to that quote earlier about how black people can't stand the physical contact. There are many, many examples in the book of people who played in rough, tough positions in the lower league, where kicking the player was more often than the ball, really.
Yeah.
And Steve Johnson was one of those sort of rough, tough centre forwards who kind of held his own against some pretty rough defenders in the lower reaches of the Football League. And there were many, many other examples, which just shows what utter nonsense was being, those stereotypes of black players, what nonsense it all was. But I think, as I say, Bill interviewed Steve, and I think it's probably best if he takes over the story.
Yeah.
I mean, what I loved about Steve was that, they say you should never meet your heroes. And Steve wasn't a hero. I wasn't a Bury supporter. But you can see why they idolise him, because he's a man of the people. He still lives in Bury, and he will always find time to sign autographs, to speak to people, because he knows that it was the supporters that made him. He wouldn't have had a job if the supporters didn't go and watch him. And certainly I agree with David's point about resilience. This idea that black players had no resilience and they couldn't put up with the conditions. Steve's not an exception. I mean, 476 games is tremendous, but there are so many players in our book that have played 700 games. Chris Kamara, Viv Anderson, Tony Ford played over 1,000 games, and that's more than any outfield player in the history of English football. You know, so to say there's no resilience is crazy.
Crazy, yeah. I'm not gonna bring up any more pictures right just yet. I just want to ask you guys a bit more about when writing this book. What did you come? Was there anything that you came up against whilst writing this book? When I say come up against any difficulties, you know, going through archives, did you meet with any resistance? And emotionally, how did you feel when you were doing, you know, writing everything?
Well, I mean, I'll start. I mean, I think you have to remember that we'd spent 40 odd years working in the civil service, so this was an absolute joy compared to work. I mean, I think the research we both enjoyed enormously. It was, you know, call us a bit sad, but we enjoy rummaging through archives. We enjoy sending off for birth certificates and death certificates and marriage certificates, because you can find out a lot from those certificates. You know, the player's heritage and so on. We enjoy rummaging through census returns that you can find online. You know, maybe that does make us sad individuals, but I think the research side, I think the research side of it we enjoyed. I'm sure I'm speaking for Bill. We enjoyed enormously. The writing, I think the writing went okay as well. I think it was the sort of the publication process that perhaps got a bit tense, to be honest. But yeah, by then the hard work had been done. So I don't know. I mean, I think we were a bit worried about finding a publisher. If you like to, obviously, anybody that's got a book that they would like to see in print, one of the biggest challenges is probably to find a publisher. And I think, you know, we stumbled across Conquer Editions. You know, we took it in turns to write to publishers. Really, the one I wrote to never even bothered to reply, so they missed out. But Conquer Editions seemed like the right sort of fit for us, because they're a fairly niche publisher. Who specialise in, you know, I call them slightly quirky football books, I suppose.
Yes,
this is quite serious by their standards. And so I think we there was that worry about would we find a publisher or not. But I think we struck lucky. Not many people would probably say, well, we found a publisher at the second attempt. That's pretty good going, really.
Yeah.
I don't have any resistance, David, but apathy. Yeah, you know, you could write to a club time after time after time and not even get the decency of a reply. The Crew Alexandra were like that. They had a very mysterious first black player, and it was claimed that he was the first black Australian to play in England, and we were pretty certain that he hadn't even been in Australia.
Black Australian.
Well, the idea was that Australia had a keep Australia white policy. So any children born to Aboriginals could be taken away from their mother and deported to England, and that you know that's awful. But it isn't the case in this particular example. So you know they weren't very helpful. But on the other side of the coin, I was amazed at how many top players were willing to give up their time. I mean, I was very hesitant about approaching the likes of Viv Anderson, Chris Kamara, but they happily gave up their time. Viv Anderson even wrote the foreword for the book, and I'm sure he's a very busy man, and you know, he's got lots of other things he could be doing. So really, really grateful. And I think Viv was putting something back, because although he was the first black England international, he'd only just heard about Jack Leslie, who in 1925, a black player, was picked for England. And when it was discovered he was black, they suddenly dropped him because they couldn't have a black player in the England team. So Viv's thinking there could have been somebody in the England team in 1925, and I hadn't even heard of him. You know, how can that be right?
Right, exactly.
I mean,
but there's a bit of history there, though, with Viv. Tell me the story. Once you met Viv and you put the book to him, what was you were able to give him a backstory about himself? What was that?
Well, I mean, shall I do that one, Bill? The thing was with Viv, I mean, I think the Anderson family is an absolutely classic example of the Windrush generation, because his parents came across from Jamaica in, I think it was 1953 and 54. They came separately, but they were already married in Jamaica. They came to England. Viv was born, I think, a year or so later. And the thing to remember, I mean, barely a year or two after he was born, there was a race riot in Nottingham. Now, people talk about the Notting Hill race riots, but there was also a race riot in Nottingham, which was extremely bloody. And imagine what it was like. You know, you've come all the way from Jamaica looking for a new life, and you've settled in Nottingham, and you suddenly realise how very, very unwelcome you are, and you've got a young son to think about. I mean, what on earth must have gone through their minds really at that stage? Have we made a terrible, terrible mistake here? So, you know, imagine the pride that Viv's dad must have felt when he was at Wembley to watch Viv step out as England's first black international. And the other thing to say about the Anderson family is that Viv's mum worked in the NHS for many, many years. And there's a typical Windrush story, if ever you heard it. Yeah. And the other thing was she was a qualified teacher in Jamaica. She came to England expecting to take up a teaching job in England, and she was told that her qualifications that she'd earned in Jamaica counted for nothing here. And although she did get a job in a school, eventually, it was as a dinner lady. You know, you don't do 3 years teacher training to be a dinner lady. So that shows you the sort of obstacles that Windrush generation were up against. They simply all too often were not welcome, and their qualifications that they'd earned, you know, were just simply disrespected.
And it was nothing, didn't it? It was like it was just nothing. You've not studied. You've done nothing.
It was superbly to her credit that she then retrained as a nurse, and she worked as a nurse in the NHS. And where would the NHS be today if it wasn't for all the Caribbean nurses who had come over and supported the NHS? Not just from the Caribbean, obviously Africa as well, but essentially, I mean, the NHS wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for that generation of nurses who came over from Jamaica and served this country in a different way by serving the NHS. So, I mean, the Anderson story, I think, is a wonderful one. And I think what you were alluding to was that we were able to tell Viv about the actual name of the ship that his parents came on and the date it docked at Plymouth, for instance, because all of that information, if you know where to look, it can be found on the internet. So he wouldn't have known that level of detail about how his parents got to England. So that's an example, I think, of where we were able to fill in some of the details that the players themselves didn't know.
Yeah, we identified Viv's grandparents, great-grandparents. He was quite excited by it.
I was just about to say that, because what I love about both of you is that no matter who I ask you about, you infuse each person. You've held on to all that information, that research. It's there. It's either that or you got a book in front of you and you're reading it. One of the two.
We couldn't make it up.
Yeah.
but they all had different stories, and they were all really exciting and interesting.
Yes.
It was funny.
I'm going to go back again to, you were saying that some people were middle class, some of them were lucky. Can you, and I want you both to pick one of each. One of these pioneers. Give me a story of one that was really a down and out story, as in, they had to have a different job. Not so much as probably being in the army, but, either being a miner or just really had to struggle, but still was a great footballer, was one of those pioneers. Who would you choose, Bill?
If you're not ready to go, I'll offer Paul Canaville, because I mean, I don't know if Paul's going to see this program, but I mean, his story is different. I mean, you mentioned about down and out. I mean, for reasons I think to do with his family life. Paul was, I think, sleeping in the back of a car at the time that he signed as a professional footballer with his first non-league club, and you can't really get much more down and out than sleeping in the back of a car. So there's an example of somebody who I think actually was, in a way, I mean, I obviously if he's watching, I could be contradicted here, but I mean, I think he was sort of saved by professional football in a way, but he did have some awful experiences as a professional footballer. I mean, from his own Chelsea fans, which was shocking.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
I mean, I was at his first game. He made his debut at Selhurst.
Oh, wow.
At Selhurst Park. Well, don't get too wowed about it, because I mean, I don't remember it. Now, this was a really important moment in Paul's life. I mean, he was making his debut as a substitute for Chelsea. Huge event for him. And I'm sorry it completely passed me by, because I was supporting Crystal Palace. So I was trying to get Crystal Palace to score an equaliser, and not paying much attention to what was going on when Paul came on. But I mean, he was booed by his own fans, and
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
which was terrible. And that wasn't just on that occasion. He was booed fairly consistently for quite some time before they finally came around.
And he thought it was the Crystal Palace fans, he was saying, and it turned out that it was his own.
Yeah, I mean that is shocking. I was oblivious. Paul was obviously deeply hurt and upset by the experience. And a few months ago, when we were in a pub, Bill and I were in a pub with somebody who was a Chelsea fan. This was in the days when you were allowed to be in pubs drinking. The Chelsea fan said, "I was at that game too," and I walked out. I was so upset by the treatment he was getting from some of my own fellow Chelsea fans, that I walked out and left. So I mean, there are through recollections of that game. For Paul, it was a deeply hurtful experience. For me, I was oblivious, and the Chelsea fan knew what was going on and walked out. He was so angry about it. So it shows that three people in the same room or in the same ground can have really rather different views of what's going on, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. Bill, what's your recollection of someone that stood out for you?
Well, if I go to the other extreme and look at someone who was wealthy, I would go for Lindy Della Penna, who was a Jamaican, who played just after the Second World War. And he came from a very middle-class Jamaican family. He went to Woolmer's Boys' School, which is sort of the Harrow of Jamaica, isn't it? The Eton of Jamaica.
Yeah.
He was brilliant at everything he did. He went to the Jamaican Sports Day, and he entered about 16 competitions and won half of them. And he had to be medically examined afterwards because they thought this is not healthy for a 16-year-old to be doing all of this. And they actually changed the rules in future so that people could only enter a certain number of events. He went across to England, got a place at Portsmouth when Portsmouth were the champions of the English League, won the title 2 years in a row. He went to Middlesbrough, where he played with Brian Clough, who went on to be a famous manager. But it was when Lindy went back to Jamaica. I mean, he married someone from Middlesbrough, went back to Jamaica. He loved horse racing. He loved any sport. He became the presenter of the equivalent of the Good Morning programme. Everything. It was like the David Beckham of Jamaica.
Really?
Everything he touched turned to gold. I think his daughter was runner-up in Miss Universe. It was just a charmed life he had, and a very happy life. I think he lived well into his 80s. He's dead now, unfortunately. Real raconteur. He exaggerated most of the stories, but not in a nasty way. But he never just tapped a goal in. It was always a volley from 25 yards or something like that. But great man. Probably would have been knighted if it had been current day. Almost certainly would have played for England under the current qualification system. But he's regarded as a Jamaican, so he didn't play for England. But he had the life that most people dream of. So yeah, great man.
When writing this book, and you're both avid football supporters, I don't know if you ever played football, growing up. But writing this book, what did you find that the comparison of, let's take away that the money that footballers get now is astronomical compared to these men who played probably for a bag of chips. Completely different. They played for the love of it. As a matter of fact, when looking into your book, some of these guys actually didn't come out to play football. They were just playing a game and realized they were that good. What would you say now to the players that, as I said, having astronomical money? Do you think they would have survived back then? I mean, this is serious because they're more pampered.
Well, I think if you wanted to be a professional footballer, if that's what you wanted, then you would have had to have survived. I mean, I think that's a point I think that Viv Anderson made to Bill in their conversation. I mean, Viv Anderson was famously very badly abused. I think in his second game that he played at Newcastle, and he was just warming up, and he was having, he was getting bananas and the monkey chants, the full racist treatment in those days. passed for normal at some grounds. And Bill asked him, did it never occur to you to kind of walk off and refuse to play it? And I think he just laughed and said, look, if I'd done that, the club would have simply found somebody else. I'd have been out of a job and down the dole on Monday looking for a new job. In those days, the clubs really didn't support the players at all. And there was nothing to stop the fans behaving in the way they behaved. So if you wanted to be a professional footballer, you had to put up with it. There was no choice. So this present generation, they stand on the shoulders of giants, really. If it hadn't been for the likes of Viv Anderson, for the likes of Chris Kamara, for the likes of dozens of lesser known players, they really wouldn't have the life that they have now. So
now,
I think it's good if they learn about some of this stuff. I'm not sure we've got much of a way of getting through to some of the current generation of superstars. Nonetheless, it would be good if they could learn about it.
I think you do. You've got the Rio Ferdinand Foundation, which I think is a really great avenue for, because he's known, and it's tapping into those sort of people. Even probably that, as I said, you've spoken to Paul Cannonville or the Ian Wrights of this world. But then you still have the nowadays players who really, really don't get it. They don't see all of the work that you guys are, dragging out of the archives to let them know that you can't just give up of what these guys actually, they didn't fight to play football, is what I'm reading. From what historically what you put in front of me, these guys didn't seem like they fought to play football. They took the abuse to play football. They lived a life of nothing to play football. But I guess if we were able to ask them, they still would have been proud. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to. Yeah, I wouldn't knock the current day players, but I would ask them, go back 100 years.
Yes.
Put yourself in a stadium where there were 40,000 white people. The rest of the team are white. The referee's white. And they're allowed to call you names, they're allowed to abuse you, and you won't get any support whatsoever. Could you cope with that? Because that's what the early black players had to put up with.
Right.
And, it's sad that they had to put up with it. Nobody was supporting them. At least now, as David says, if there is obvious racist activity in the ground, you would hope a steward would intervene. You would hope ultimately the team could walk off and they would support one another. But not 100 years ago.
No. And that's the reason why. The reason why I'm bringing that question up is this. We are now having the same black players being abused, but through social media. And, the funny thing is, and it's not just black players, you're getting the Irish, the Scottish, anyone that's got any, people are saying it's that diversity within them, they're being abused. Now, some of them want to commit suicide. You got those with mental health issues. Now, all of these guys would have had the same thing back then. It just wasn't highlighted as it is now. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. What would you, and I know that we're not in the position, I just want to get your views on it. As people, historians who've written a book about these black pioneers, you've seen the plight that they've gone through. What would you say to these guys who are now saying, I'm not having it. I want social media to stop doing this. I feel persecuted. I'm not going to take the knee anymore. Bill, what would you, or David then, give me, what would you say?
What I was going to say was, perhaps do what Marcus Rashford does. I mean, of the modern players, I mean, Marcus Rashford is not the only one, but I pick him out as a kind of a high-profile person who has taken a high-profile campaign, which involves some risk from his point of view, I don't doubt, because I don't doubt he got dog's abuse on social media for his campaigns. But he's also won a huge number of fans who've perhaps come to realise that modern-day footballers, and he's a particular black footballer, but modern-day footballers perhaps are willing to put something back into society. So I think Marcus Rashford and Raheem Sterling, players like that who have a huge profile and therefore have a huge amount to lose, I would very much respect them for the stands that they have taken on issues like this. And I think I would encourage more players to adopt that kind of attitude, because it's not passively accepting it. It's saying, I want to do something to make this society better. I think all respect to them for doing that.
I like that. What do you think, Bill?
Well, I agree with David, but I do worry about the players who haven't got the profile or the status or the resilience of the Marcus Rashfords of the world, because they didn't all, in the old days, they didn't all go on to play 600-700 games. Some of them were broken. They only played 2 or 3 games. So we've still got the equivalent of that, so there are people who we need to help and support. They aren't high-profile players. They're getting this abuse. Who's there to help them? Who's there to listen to them, support them? I don't know the answer, but we need to do something about the ones who can't cope.
I agree with you there. I think it's only now that, I was speaking to somebody else the other day who is, and I think I had Kevin Lisby on, and I think they're all trying to work together to find a way to speak to players who are abused, players, even down to the safeguarding now that they're now bringing, that's now being highlighted in football today. So I'm not taking away from, I just wanted to get your view, but to deal with the mental abuse that these guys are putting on themselves, that they don't mean to put it on themselves, but that's the sport that they've chosen to play. That's what they've chosen to do. And it's like, okay, this is what I've chosen to do, then I have to take the abuse that goes with it. And it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's just totally wrong. Let's bring us back to where we are with the book. Where do you see this book is here now. It is doing the rounds. And I, for one, as I said to you before, I can't wait for it to just blow up. And now I'm being serious. I just want this book to blow up. And especially now that we're coming out of lockdown a bit more, you probably can get to go to the schools. You can actually physically make this happen. Like, for instance, we know for a fact that on the 24th of July, we've got an event where we've got all, a massive football tournament going on. I've spoken to Michael. It'd be great to have you guys to come down, where we'll get you guys to do like a section and do a speak, before we open the tournament. So that's something that we're all, we're trying to incorporate, which I know that you're doing all of this already. But where do you see this book now that it's all published? Where do you want it to go?
Well, I'll perhaps start. We think that the stories we uncovered here have got huge educational potential. We've been talking about some of that this evening. So what I'm particularly working on at the moment is a kind of educational resource pack that teachers can use, which basically sets out some of the background to Black British history, because the history itself is not that well known, football history, so that teachers who don't know much about Black history or don't know anything much about football will feel sufficiently confident to deliver lessons talking about some of the people in the book. And at the moment, we're focusing on Viv Anderson, Jack Leslie, and also Walter Tull, and we're going to have a female player in there as well, probably Hope Powell. So the idea is that teachers will have a kind of set of resources that they can use to talk to young people, students, and I've shown this to a couple of sort of head teachers who say that this resource, has got huge potential and can be used right across the age range. I think it goes from Key Stage 1 right up to the 6th form, because if you start talking about slavery and you start looking at the slave registers from Barbados, which you can do legitimately when you're talking about Walter Tull, because that's where he came from, that is kind of really good 6th form quality work. And if there are loads of ways that you can engage children right down to quite young ages in this. So
yes.
I'm working with an organisation called Sporting Heritage, who specialise in this sort of thing. And so with them, my aim is certainly to produce an education pack. And obviously, Bill perhaps more so than me, is very much supporting the sorts of initiatives that Michael is pushing out there. We had a call earlier this afternoon, which Bill can talk about, which I think was largely with the Crystal Palace Foundation. But I'll stop.
That's the one. Yeah, that's what I'm involved with as well. Yes.
So, I mean, I'll stop there. I mean, basically, for me, there's an education resource that we can make available to every school in the country if they want it.
Yeah, I think there are two products, aren't there? David's developing a resource package. I'm still focusing on the book itself because there are 93 great stories in there. I want to use every one of them. And I want to encourage young people to read, you know, to want to read, to be interested in things. So I think there's still a lot to be done for the book itself, complemented by the resource package that David's pulling together.
Have you guys thought of, and I'm going to put it out there in the air, the universe, have you thought of actually doing a video using imagery of the old, I mean, is there anything in the archives of any old still football of these players that have passed? Is there anything that you could dig from the archives? Because I think it'd be such a great advert if there was any form of stills from the 1800s or the 1900s and coming into that, you know, the 1920s,
Yeah,
and make
there is.
great, yeah, if there's, I just think that, and this is, again, this is just Valerie putting it out there. It's good to speak things into existence. But with the great book that you have, you know, and I'm going to put the cover up again for everybody. This book and the advert that would, you know, get someone to do a really good video highlighting it, I just think it'd be spectacular. Has that ever crossed your mind?
I mean, David and I aren't clever enough to do that, so we need a lot of support. But as an example,
That's why I'm mentioning it.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to help us, that'd be fantastic. But we did actually get involved in producing a calypso for Viv Anderson, and that is a tremendous, I think, about a 5 or 6 minute video, which an expert has pulled together. So there are lots of photographs of family, of Viv in the early days as a child, his parents as well. So, you know, that's an example of what can be done, and there's enough material on the older players to do likewise. So we're definitely open to offers of help.
If anybody's interested in hearing the Viv Anderson Calypso, it's by somebody called Alexander D. Great, and you can see it on YouTube.
Thank you for that information. And not only that, Alexander D. Great, if they want to hear that, we would love, and I'm putting it out there because we know quite a few video editors, video story filmmakers. If you are watching this and if you feel that you could give these guys a help to make this book and the story and get those archives, get those black and white with the lines going through it and make this advert, because I can actually see it. I think it should be done. But I'm saying that because I've got things maybe I can, but I'm not saying a word. But if there's anyone out there and they hear what I'm saying, get in touch with us and let's make this happen. Now, coming away from you're onto something new already, aren't you?
Yep.
What is it you're now working on?
Well, in order of priority, I suppose, we've identified a passenger on the Windrush, a singer-actress from Trinidad called Mona Baptiste. And we looked at her life sort of 4 or 5 years ago as part of a project David mentioned earlier. But once we delved into her life, a bit like the footballers, the stories that started coming out. I mean, as an example, she married a jewel thief.
Oh my God! Right?
She didn't know.
He wasn't just a jewel thief. He was a toff. He went to public school, and this was in the 1930s. And the media couldn't believe that anybody who went to a public school can be a jewel thief. So it really made the newspapers. And the man, he was called Harley. He got sentenced to 7 years in jail, but also 20 lashes of the cat and nine tails. And this is in 1938. And this is still going on. And there were a lot of protests. You know, this is inhumane, but they went ahead and did it. And he was obviously he wasn't a nice man. We've got lots of evidence of him being violent towards his first wife. He died mysteriously in a car crash in Germany in 1958. Mona went on to be a superstar on the continent, a massive star in Germany. It has an happy ending because she married an Irishman, a lovely Irishman who's still alive, in 1972. Mona died in 1993, but her story is just absolutely riveting. And we've just about drafted the entire book. We just need to get it published as soon as we can. So that's one passenger on the Windrush. I mean, I'm also looking at every passenger on the Windrush, because at the moment it's a list of 1,027 names. We have no idea why they were on the ship, what happened to them afterwards, what their jobs were, what their children went on to do. And it's
Are these unaccounted for people? You're saying there's 1,027 names?
1,027 on the passenger list, yeah. There were 15 stowaways 15 apprehended stowaways on top of that. But to listen to one of the living survivors from the Windrush, he sort of laughs every time, and he gives the impression there were a lot more stowaways that simply, got away. Which, good luck to them. They were actually in the country legally. There's no problem. The stowaways that got apprehended were fined simply because they hadn't paid the fare and they were on the ship illegally. They were perfectly entitled to be in England. None were deported. But
Wow.
I think a lot of them are worried now with the Windrush scandal, thinking, if my great-grandfather actually was a stowaway, might I be thrown out? Well, it wouldn't be, but I understand the fear.
Oh my God. And so that's the next thing that you're working on. I'd love to hear the story, because you get to hear about Titanic and blah blah Titanic. And there is a lot of Windrush stories, but I've not. So this is the first time I'm hearing about the unaccounted for.
Well, I think what would surprise you was who was on board. I mean, I've already identified a man who went on to be the first president of Trinidad and Tobago. There was the heiress to the Cunard shipping line. There was
and they were all on the Windrush boat.
Yeah. MacDonald Bailey was going to the Olympics to watch his son run in the 100 meters in the 1948 Olympics. The talent on that boat, if that boat had sunk or anything like that, the world would have been a different place. It really, really did change Britain.
Like the Titanic, right?
Yeah. Yes, so much talent.
But I'm glad it didn't, because I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I would not be here. Guys, I've had a really great evening for you guys, telling me everything about football's Black Pioneer and on to the next level for the Windrush. And you've got to come back when that book is actually finished. It'd be really good to hear that in full depth. Is there any parting things that you'd like to say to anyone out there regarding the book? And, I mean, I know, David, you were saying, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put a pack together. Someone just said, Lord of knowledge. I think they meant a load of knowledge shared. So lots of knowledge shared. Okay, fine. That was just I was like, what? But yeah. You've imparted a lot of knowledge, and that is absolutely true, into today's show. Is there anything else that you would impart with us that you haven't said already whilst writing this book?
Well, I mean, I'll wrap up on my account by saying, I think when you and I had a chat before, I mean, I was quite negative about racism in Britain today. And as we know from the report that was published yesterday, I was quite wrong about that. Apparently, there's much less racism than I suggested. But what I wanted to say tonight was that this book reveals lots of uplifting stories, lots of people who, yes, they did suffer racist abuse, but they rose above it. They showed resilience, they showed determination, and they went on to have tremendously successful careers. And they and thousands of other people like them from the Caribbean, from Africa, have contributed hugely to this society, and shouldn't forget people from the Indian subcontinent as well. So there's people who weren't born on these shores have contributed enormously, and there are some really good uplifting stories in this book that show examples of that. And I think we should concentrate. Well, I want to finish by concentrating on the uplifting stories that there are in there as well.
Yes.
Okay, for my part, I mean, we spent 4 years collecting this information. All I want to do is share as much of it as possible. We're not businessmen or anything like that. We just got lots of information that we want to share with other people. So if anybody's listening and they want to ask questions, there's a blog, there's the Twitter account. We really just want to share, no more than that, because we're quite excited by what we found.
I, for one, am just really pleased that you have shared this. I have been acknowledged. Yes, again, the young lady says, you have definitely shared a knowledge that I didn't know anything about. And I would have classed myself as a staunch footballer, someone who knew everything about the 93, clubs in the country. I don't just watch Spurs. So, but what I'm taking out of all of this is the education that can come from it. It's the education that the youngsters, if you grab them from the ages of 6, 7 and upwards, what they can learn about, the history of other people who have strived to make it what we have got today. And and it's a history. It is not just about the pioneers. It actually is history that no one talks about. And I, for one, will be singing from the rafters. And I'm glad that it's come on my platform. And people automatically will keep seeing this over and over again on the YouTube channel. So for me, I want to thank you for coming back on again to actually go into more depth than we did the last time. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having us, Valerie.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No, absolute pleasure. So to everyone in the chat room, as I said, yeah, you've only just joined me. Gigi, good evening, my lovely. Someone's just joined. I go, no, yeah, no, you've only just joined and we're about to finish. We've been on for about an hour and 15 minutes now, or maybe an hour and a half. So we're about to finish. So you're going to have to watch the rerun, I'm afraid. But thank you for tuning in, Gigi. God bless you. And to everyone else in this chat room, thank you for joining us as well. The guys can't see what you're saying, but anyone else on YouTube, thank you for joining us today. Please give up. I'm bowing to the historians and the authors, Bill Hahn and David GLEAVE. Guys, if you stay in the chat, into the green room, I'll come back to you shortly. I'm just going to say good night to the folks. But again, thank you so much for sharing. And don't forget, guys, it is www, if I got this right, www.football _black_pioneer.com.
David, is that right?
I think it's probably hyphens rather than underscores. I think.
Okay, it's all hyphen. So it's
so.
www.football-black-pioneer.com. Please, guys, check out this book. As David said, and Bill has reiterated, it is a fun book to read. It is a feel-good story. That it's not about doom and gloom. It's not battering racism or anything of that kind. It's just really good, wholesome, good people that we've just never heard about. And I think you should all go out like myself. Natasha's bought the book. Louise has bought the book because everyone texts me and goes, I bought the book. Some guy called Clive Bailey texts me and goes, what was the name of that book? Well, the book is called Football Black Pioneer. And before they go, I'm going to chuck it up one more time, or put it up one more time. Here it is. You can get it out on Amazon, and you can also find it on Conquer, as in when you used to play Conkers at school, CONKER.com. You can get Football's Black Pioneers. Once again, guys, good night, and thank you again for blessing Standing in my truth, all about you. Speak to you
Thank you.
shortly.
Night, everyone.
All right.
Oh my God. Thank you to, if you're just joining, as I said, you are monumentally late. Love you too, Gigi. Love you too, as always. As you know, I'm always going to go live. We've got so many different various people that come on. If you're catching the replay, you missed these guys giving you various different stories, how they had all of that up here. But 4 years of writing this awesome book, it is well worth teaching your youngsters, your family, buy it as a present. It is well worth a read. Big up out to Paul Cannonville Foundation. I am wearing a t-shirt in support. It was well worth money, well worth spent. Love, hate, racism. Love football, hate racism. Let me say that again. Love football, hate racism. Go out and buy the Football Black Pioneers book on Amazon. We had David GLEAVE and Bill HERN. My name is Valerie M. or Maxfield. Standing in My Truth, It's All About You show. Check us out on Saturday morning for the Breakfast Sports Edition show. I'm not going to tell you. You're just going to have to watch the video that comes up next after this. But good night. God bless you. And enjoy the rerun if you're only just joining me now. Take care. Good night.